Namaste and welcome to a new episode of the Bharatvaarta podcast. My name is Ashish Chandorkar and I'm your host for the day. Today we have with us a very special guest, Mr. DV Sridharan. DVG is a well-known person who has been focusing on spreading positivity in many different ways, and we will talk about some of his endeavors. He has also been connected with the Indic Academy very closely, and we'll talk about some of that as well, some of the social causes that he has supported over the years. But very importantly, we speak about his book today, which is called Good News India, and that's the main theme of today's conversation. Thank you, DVG, for joining us.
Thank you, Ashish. Thank you for having me. Pleasure to be with you, meeting you again.
Yes, great to meet. So, just as a context for our viewers and for our listeners, this is a book which DV sir has written. It's called Good News India. There are some copies, I think, on your bookshelf as well. So, the idea today was to talk to him about his the motivation to write this book and to understand from him his views on the media today more broadly, right? If you can, set the context of how did you think about writing this book, and let's take it from there.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, your opening question gives me a good lead. I mean, it'll be a good thing to compare the media of my time. I'm 79 now, so I've been around for better part of a century. I find it fascinating to compare the media of my time to media of today. I'll come to that presently. Now, going back to 30, 40 years, when I was growing up, I used to be in the Merchant Navy. I used to travel the world as a young man. And India was in a bad shape in those days. So there's no doubting about it. We had food shortages, we had poverty, we had a sluggish economy, practically not growing and things like that. So it was a hard time. We used to bring grains from overseas to feed India, and then we used to have one-day fasting and things like that. Although things were bad, it was not as entirely bad as the media would make out. So I used to think that there was some good things that we must be doing, or we must have done over the centuries for us to have come this far as a civilization. So I got tired. Even the books used to be slanted, even Naipaul, who after that book, Wounded Civilization, began to understand India, was more favorably disposed towards it, kinder to India. But his books prior to that was uniformly rubbishing India. It used to be depressing to read him. And there was an industry in the West which was always waiting for the imminent death of India, because it was written off as an impossible case. But our media, compared with today's media, was almost saintly in those days, I must say. But that was not good enough for me. It was still depressing. And the media of my time, you must remember, you have no reason to know about the times I'm talking about. There was only print media. There was no other media. There was just the newspaper, the broadsheet that used to come out. Even the weekly magazines, there were almost none, unless you counted the Illustrated Weekly and Femina and Filmfare and things like that, and Eve's Weekly and stuff like that. And maybe the first change in the media broad spread happened when M.J. Akbar produced that Sunday. It was priced 1 rupee, and it came out every week. And that, I would say, was the start of the media revolution, which has taken it this far. And I personally believe it has lost its way today. But my idea was, you publish the reality of India, which was not pleasant. There were shortages, there was famine, there was fasting, there was poverty. But why don't you also publish good news? That was my query. And that was not being done. That was my reaction, was to go and find the good news and showcase it.
Right. So you started your website called Good News India in 2001, right?
Yes, that's correct. Yeah, that's correct.
So my question here is, like, are people naturally more attracted towards bad news, right? Quote unquote. Is there no space for positivity in the media discourse today, or even 20 years ago when you started the website? I mean, do you see any similarities between then and now? Has the user behavior changed?
Yeah, the behavior changed. I think the significance of my Good News India adventure, the timing of that being 2001, it was the first couple of years of internet being available to the common man. I see. The internet was available industrially. It was first began as a tool for the American Defense Forces. Then it was made more accessible. It turned out to be a beautiful two-way traffic. It was becoming available for the people, and they could get the people in their view screens, So it worked both ways, but then it vastly benefited. I was prompted to start Good News India only because I was gobsmacked by the internet. As soon as I saw it, I said, here's a revolution. And I never ceased to compliment myself for having seen the pivotal change it was going to make in the media. I saw it from day one. I knew that it was the way to go. So I said, I don't have to push my stories through an editor and leave it to his whimsy. And no editor can select you to his whimsy. There's a proprietor sitting on top of him who conducts what news will be published. So I didn't want to be filtered. And I'm not a journalist, I'm a self-taught writer. And I was a voracious reader that helped me. But I'd never been published except in a college magazine, perhaps. But I was interested in news and current affairs, in history and literature and all that. But above all, my passion was India at the time. So I said, let me publish it. So I played a part. I was possibly one of the earliest digital media websites in India. There was no Google. Google was not invented when I began. It was 3 years old, I think. They had the two guys were still in the garage. And there was no Google. The word blog had not been invented. There was no WordPress. There was no nothing. There was no content management system. You can't go and start a blog and get writing. You had to set it up yourself. So I learned it to do it. So I was set up, it was not big technology. I began with HTML coding. And then I became a little more proficient. My website was set up by me entirely. I taught myself how to set it up. And it is a one-man show. So I used to drive around the country, interview the people. I never wrote after the first year. First year, I just used to clip and paste good news kind of a thing in my thing. Then I said I must scale it up and I must do it with authentic stories. So that's how the adventure began. But now, I think you asked me, how does it compare with today's media? So there's a significant difference, and I'm very particular that what I say reaches a lot of your viewers. You see, there was bad news in my time. There was poverty, famine, unemployment, and border disputes. Border disturbances. All those happened. There was genuine bad news. My quarrel with the media of my time was that they were not showcasing the good news that there was. There was as much as bad news. There was also good news. And my hunch was there's substantially a lot of good news. Even today, I believe there's a lot more good happening in India than there is bad of the media will ape out. But the crucial difference I find with the media today, there is bad news, yes, but today's media manufactures bad news. There's an industry that churns out bad news. And it's not stupidly done. It's extremely cleverly done. You have to take a line or a strand or a misquote or something like that and build a whole story. And this is what I call synchronous media operation. It's like a kamikaze drive. A whistle blows and they all come. And the story flies as though it's true. And like someone said, before the truth wakes up and sees, the lie has traveled twice around the world. So that is what it is. I pity the consumers. I think there are a lot of people succumbing to the terrible manufactured news that's being put out. And in a way, in the time of freedom that we talk about, that the internet has given, people are actually being shut up. It's very difficult to find the narrative that is so beautifully orchestrated and set at large. And this is the basic difference. I hope I answered your question, but this is what appears to be on first take.
Right. No,
I think we
absolutely.
should talk about this quite often. Many people should bring this up,
Yes,
even in your other,
indeed. In fact, we'll come back to the current situation of the media and social media, but let's talk a little bit more about the website itself.
yeah,
I mean, you ran this for about 6 years, and you said
yeah,
you mentioned in your book that this was completely self-funded. You sold a parcel of land to really start the
yeah.
operation. What was that experience like of not being helped by anyone and having to really do everything by yourself, including pictures and going to
Yeah,
sites, locations? How was that experience like?
yeah. I'm a passion-driven man, and I start something and I passionately do it for a while, and then I walk away from it, and that's typically what I do. It was basically for my own sanity and my own hunch. I want to back my hunch and prove it. I said there's a lot good happening in this country. Come on, shut up. It's not as bad as you people make out. I wanted to take that on as a challenge. And in the process, I gained a lot. I met a section of Indians I would have otherwise not met because I trained for the Navy when I was very young. I went away from home at 17. I was a cadet in Bombay, 1960-63. And as soon as we graduated, we jumped on ships and traveled the world. For the next 10 years, we were traveling. So most of me and my batchmates, we ended up seeing more of the world than of India. So it was 35 into the 30s when we arrived back. And then we saw an India which is suddenly strange. We had all been alienated in many, many ways. And I was alienated myself because almost exclusively, I misplaced my Tamil. I almost exclusively taught and spoke in English. So this I had to reconnect with India. So my Good News India adventure helped me reconnect with India. That is my big takeaway. But in the process, I seem to have struck a vein of a great need. I found my authors. It was, if I may say so, if I may brag, it was self-funded, but there was not enough funds to advertise. I never advertised. But I must say, it met with instant success. There was a spontaneous stream of mails for me. People writing and saying, this is wonderful, it's refreshing. And if I may officially brag here, I think my site pioneered a genre of only good news. I would publish nothing but news. If the main media can ignore good news and publish only bad news or depressing news, I have the right to publish only good news and ignore the bad things. I also justified saying there's enough people in the media who are highlighting what is bad about India. There was not one until I began who highlighted what was good going on. So in that way, I am quite, without any sense of shame or modesty, I must claim that I pioneered the genre of good news. And subsequently, Doordarshan started something called Good News India. And without even asking me about the name, I never copyrighted it, but I hold the domain name even now. goodnewsindia.com is owned by me. I don't update the site. But it caught on. And once social media came, there was also the balanced voice, Not, it's the social media good news voices are not able to match the bad news voices on social media. But still, there's a game on now. Before I began, there was no game. It was a one-sided.
Right. Yeah, exactly. In fact, I remember a couple of newspapers in the last few years took this initiative of their own, where they would publish good news on the front page for one day, or at least some good news on the front page. So I think the trend has gone on.
I think they found a cream to rub on their guilt, you know.
So the website, sir, was there for about 6 years.
Mhm.
Why did you exit that venture? I mean, is there a background to that also?
Yes, I did. And it was logically my. See, I went to publish Good News India because I had to reconnect with the India from which I had felt I was alienated. And I did reconnect and fell head over heels with the people I met and the work that they did. It was an eye opener for me. I used to drive all by myself and know nothing. And I used to drive around and I took trains as well, but never flew for it. I didn't have enough money for flying around. I was all self funded. So I would go to a particular place, do 5 or 6 stories, come back, sit at home for 1 month, 2 months, and put out all the stories, and then go back again. This is what I did. It was tiresome, tiring, and it became hard. But in the meantime, I seem to have been rewarded by those stories. It is never meant to make money, and it never made money. It was not intended to make money. So that's not an issue at all. Uh, what it rewarded me was it showed me the what I could do that is worthwhile by India with my life. You know, uh, it's not as though I wanted to set up saying I'll make my good news. It's not that. I think I was searching for something that was worthwhile to do. And as I was doing my stories, I eventually did about 100 major stories. When I say major stories, they are about 2,000 to 2,500 words or even 3,000 words. Only 25 of them appear in my book. The balance are on the site. And my site is not maintained properly. It is there. It's not maintained. I don't have the time. But I found towards the end, in the last third of second half of my Good News India stories, the stories I enjoyed doing were the stories that most inspired me was the people working with the environment, the environmental restoration, environmental care. And it's like water harvesting, planting a forest, and taking care of husbandry, animals and cows and things like that, and going off the cities and living close to the land. This sort of a story is inspiring to me. And my hero, for instance, Anna Hazare, poor man, I have great admiration and sympathy for that man. He got hijacked by a charlatan, but he himself was a wonderful man. I sat with him in Agrawal City and I spent a whole day seeing his work. You can't take away from his rural development work. If he had known for what's good for him, he would have stayed away from politics. But his reputation in history as a man who revived that economy is that you should read that thing. He's included there. It's monumental work. So it changed me that single people with almost no backing, without complaining about the government, these are all people, mind you, who did things that they need not be doing. Anna Hazare was an army truck driver. He had enough pension. He could have retired. He could have eaten, gone to sleep, and read something and went to a temple and done pujas and gone home. But he took the step outside of himself. All my heroes do that. If you see in the book, they all did something that they need not have done. They were not required for their well-being or for their family, nothing. So that inspired me, and I said, let me make my attempt with environmental restoration. So it doesn't take much. You got to find a piece of derelict land and start caring for it. So when I started doing that, I got deeply involved. I'm still there. I'm now trying to find out how to leave it with a successor and all that. I'm struggling with that, but that's a different matter. I took an utterly barren, derelict land and revived it, and I harvest 4 million liters of water per year and charge it to the ground. I remember I contacted you when the Jal Yuk Shiver began in Maharashtra, and I was curious about it, and I used to dog you for information. So it's water, finally, and that fascinates me. And it's Good News India that pointed the way and asked me to do it. So that's why I left it. So I couldn't have done both. This required hands-on working. I enjoy working with my hands, of course, with some help. less and less as I age, but I still do. So once you get involved and see grass coming back, and birds coming back, and trees coming up, and water becoming scarce to abundant, things get. I used to live with a solar panel too, and then I used to pump all the water with a windmill. I had no electricity. So this was exciting. I got lost in that. I thought it was a good way to get lost. So that's how I stopped Good News India.
Right. In fact, I was going to remind you that our first conversation happened over a water conservation project, which you mentioned, which was a Jal Yukt Shivar
Yeah,
in
you did
Maharashtra.
extensively reported on that. I remember
Yeah,
that.
yeah,
Yeah.
great. So I think the website went on till 2006. How did the at what point did you decide to write the book about it or compile the book from it? How did that idea came through? Was it an Indic Academy idea or was it your idea?
Yeah. Indic Academy, the redoubtable and unshakable Harikaran Badlamani, is ever bubbling with ideas. And he came to a conclusion, and I think he was bang right. He says you're not going to win the narrative of India by sitting on social media and countering little points, making debating points. You're not going to score it. You've got to do the hard work, and you've got to write. You've got to write serious stuff. You've got to put out your narrative, well-researched narratives, either as an essay, which is taken seriously, got to develop the followership, and then go next and write books. Books are taken credibly. It's not easy to write a book, even a book like mine, which is only an anthology. I had written every word of it, but I had written most of it 20 years ago. I had to write a prologue and an epilogue. Even that took me a long time. So a book is not an easy thing to write, but you can't be lazy if you think that you're going to fight the civilizational war. So he started something called Center for Indic Writers. And there was a young lady called Dimple Cole there. And she was the first director. Oh my, she was a battery. She was a dynamo. And she got many people published. And then one day she spotted me. She says, DVG, you got to write a book. I said, I stopped writing. I'm able to harvesting water. So I couldn't dodge her. She kept on asking me, you write something. You must write about your life's experiences and things like that. Just kept evading. And one day I told her, now listen, my writing is there. If somebody would publish stories from there as an anthology, I'm game for it. I'll write a prologue and epilogue. And that's how the book came. So I have not worked as much as many authors do for the book. It's my first book. But it's all my work. It's all my really. And I do find that my stories have aged well and they still read well, if I may say so myself. It's a good thing. I do want young people to read it and start practicing the genre of good news reporting in their blogs, in their social media pages. They got to come up and dig the good news happening around them. And I would like to make one point, if I may, here. If you read the foreword written by Ananta Nageshwaran, he makes a significant point, It's only fake news that doesn't require basis. And good news has to sit on sound grounds. It has to be on solid ground. You've got to have credibility. You can't make bombastic, invented news and float it as good news. It'll get shot. So luckily, even before he wrote, he was one of my early fans, loyal fans from year 2001. That's how I know him. I ensured that whatever I put out was authentic. And I had to meet the people. That is, after the first 6 months or so, I gave myself the task. Unless I interviewed a person personally, I would not publish it. And I would get my facts wrong. For a self-taught journalist, I was very diligent about my interviewing. And I used to take the photographs myself and go home and write. And I'll go over my facts. If somebody corrected me on fact, not on my style, if they corrected me on my fact, I would correct it after checking. if I'm wrong about some number, if I got 4,800, whereas it was only 4,200, well, I would change that. But otherwise, good news has to be on firm basis.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that's a very good point.
Yeah.
And which is why, as you rightly said, especially in the era of social media today, it's very easy to spread a wrong news or a wrong notion or
Yeah,
distort a fact, because the correcting it takes a lot of time, but spreading it doesn't take any time at all.
absolutely. True, so true.
Yeah. So you mentioned about how your stories have aged well, and let's talk about two of them, which I picked up from the 25 stories which you have in the collection. The one is on Goonj, on Anshu Gupta's
Oh, yeah.
right? Now, Goonj was very small when I think you must have written about it, right? I think
Oh, yeah.
uh,
Good.
any thoughts on that one?
Oh, Anshu was actually introduced to me by my big fan couple, Anta Nageshwaran and Ramya, were my good news India supporters from day one. So they had discovered Anshu, and Ramya called me and mailed me. And she says, DV, you have to write about this man. You've got to meet this man. And he's an amazing person. And so it turned out to be. So I met him. First, I did a small story. I had two types of news there. One was the main featured story. There were hundreds. And I also had something called the supplements. The supplements were not necessarily investigated and done by me, but reasonably verified. But snippets of good news would go into the supplements thing. So I published a supplement about him. Then he came to Chennai once, and I got to meet him, and I was bowled over by what this man had done. He had been in an accident. He was hospitalized, and his father said, what are you going to do? The future looked bleak. So he says he will write. He took to writing. And then he came out of it. And then he met some amazing man. I forget that man's name. He was a Muslim man who lived outside the hospital. He and his wife used to ferry abandoned, unclaimed corpses to go and cremate or bury. So he saw people like that, and he said that there's such a lot of things to do. And then one story that he told me struck me, and that moved me to tears. He says the genital sanitation for women in rural India is so terrible. They don't have proper, when they menstruate, they can't keep it clean. And they don't have enough change of saris. Going back 30 years ago, they had no saris, the same soil saris. They don't have time to wash it well. So they get infections around vaginal infections. And in some cases, they would share the same, like a pad. It's not a pad, it's more like a male lagoti that they used to wear. They would share it, and without time to clean it. So this is how the infections happen. So it saddened me. And this man, he says, I'm going to change it. So he invented sanitary napkins made of cloth. And that's how he asked people to contribute their unwanted cloth. And he sorted it out, laundered it. And he had one principle. He says, don't give me pieces of clothing that cannot be worn. Give it with dignity. Give clothes that has become undersized or you're tired of, but it should be wearable. Don't give torn ones and without buttons. Don't heap indignity on top of so-called charity. So he got that. And the big sheets and things like that came, he always washed them, ironed them before he gave it as in charity. He's a very sensitive man, and his wife Meenakshi. They are a couple. They are really, he has got a Magsase. And I have a very low opinion of the Magsase Award, given the number of awardees. I scanned the awardees. But people like Anshu should get 2 or 3 of them. So he started manufacturing the napkins, but he never gave anything free. He would charge 1 rupee for a shirt or 10 rupees for a sari. Pay something and take it, so that it can never be said that you got alms. No, you paid for it. You took it. So the dignity of giving is the prime thing that struck me about Anshu. And I hope he watches this interview. I would like many people to come to know. He's well taken care of, he's scaled up. But I think more people should volunteer with him. Young people should volunteer with him and discover what is working, what a good NGO should be. Homespun NGO.
Right. Great story. The other one which I wanted to discuss was the 300 trees of Thimakka and Chickamma, right? That's what.
Oh, I think there's a risk of Thimakka fatigue sitting in. I mean, she is a star. Everyone wants to know about Thimakka, and I have the honor of having brought her to the front page. I would say I discovered her. I discovered the inner page news in a newspaper, fourth page. Third page, of course, belongs to the twice born and the heavenly. And the fourth page, inner bottom right-hand corner, I saw a snippet saying, some Puraskar, environmental Puraskar, was awarded to Thimakka, who planted 300 trees. I said, now, wait a minute. The story cannot be the award. The story has to be the lady who planted the trees. This is the kind of a skew I was fighting. So it took me 3 months to find out where she lived. The newspaper report said a lady from Karnataka.
Right.
And there was no internet at the time. There was no cell phone. There were a few people who had a cell phone. My first cell phone was half the size of a brick, and that cost me 15,000 rupees. And my first digital camera was 33,000 rupees. Kodak is a share. It had 6 megapixels, and the battery had to be changed 2 or 3 times a day. And so it was that kind of a world. So there's no way to find out. So I spent 3 months before I found out where she lived. She lived in Kunigal, near Kunigal, and I drove there and I sat in a hut. And I know Kannada. I can speak it. I can't read or write because I went to school in Bangalore for some years. So I touched her feet, and before I could see, she lives on the same street, which are lined by her 300 trees. They're there on both sides of the road. They even now people trees. And I slowed down. As soon as I enter Karnataka, I slow down automatically. It's one of my favorite states, And things slow down. They speak slowly. Everything happens. If you avoid Bangalore, rest of the place, Karnataka is easygoing. So that road was even slower than what Karnataka. You just didn't want to leave that road. It was completely shaded for 3 kilometers, raised by the husband and wife. So I sat on the floor and she told me the story. She had no grievance. And she says, we found something to do in our lives. They didn't have children. They said, we'll raise trees. As simple as that. See, these people, I'm sure there are 100 more Thimakkas waiting to be discovered if the media spent some time and energy. And if they did not, are not daunted by the famous phrase of a major media man, the tyranny of distance. If they overcome the tyranny of distance and put the nose down a bit and look at the ground, there are a lot of good stories happening in the ground.
Right. And in this case, she received the Padma Shri, right, in 2019.
Oh, yeah. And I must say that both of them, 2 of my heroes got Padma Shri. And one is Girish Bharatvaarta, who built bridges for villages, and Thimakka. And in both cases, I was honored because they used the stories from my photographs from my website to announce the award. So I felt very, very, very thrilled about it. Yeah.
Yes, in fact, I do remember someone putting this on Twitter that in the case of Thimakka, yours was the only place where the pictures and the story was available to start off.
Yes, I did.
That,
I must share one success that Thimakka story had. I wrote the story and ended it by saying, shouldn't this lady, the road be named after her and her husband, Chikana? He had died. And why don't some young people from Karnataka take some interest in it and move the people that are powerful enough to do this and have the street named? And it began a movement online. See, I had 6,000 followers without advertising. And most of them were overseas. And most of the overseas people were in America. Most of the boys who leave, and they were depressed by the bad news coming out of India. They wanted a relief. They wanted a little treat of good news. So they took it upon themselves. They started a fan club for Thimakka, and the street is finally named after her in Chittagong now.
Okay, wonderful.
Yes, and Modi ji office was the one that gave the Padma Shri. The next year, they gave for Girish Bharatvaarta. He's also a person I front paged.
Okay, interesting. Great. So let us talk about the present day a little bit from the, having spoken about some of the stories. But so two points here. One was on the social media usage, right? So what do you make of that? I mean, I know you are yourself active, but do you think it has really added value in terms of changing narrative, or is it actually amplifying the bad news even more? I mean, what's your view on social media's usage today?
I think the social media, you see the amount of funding that even social media has, and what I call the mushroom sites that have come up. Strangely, and I wouldn't say not coincidentally, with Modi ji's arrival in office in 2014, 2004, to power in 2004, and he was deemed an emerging kind of a leader. The number of portals that have come up that operate in a synchronized manner, it is daunting. I think the narrative is with the people who rubbish India. I think they can get away by ignoring the good news that there is. You cannot force them to publish good news. They know it. I think some of them are veteran journalists, at least one or two are veteran journalists. They know that there's good news. But reluctantly, when the gun is placed to the temple and is about to be fired, they would reluctantly admit that some good had happened. And then the famous English word, but, or however. However. The however is a major story. The however defeats the good news and buries it and smothers it. So this is the game that's going on. And I think the social media handle that is battling for India's the right India or the good India, or the inherently good India. A lot of things are wrong with India. There's no doubt about it. But my conviction is India is a self-reforming society. It is not living on a conviction handed down, say, 2,000 or 1,400 years or 2,000 years or even 5,000 years. We change automatically. We have a questioning sector within the religion that has come to be known as Hinduism. It is Indian religion, the religion of the land, the belief system of the land. Constantly questioning, even the founders of this thing, if there's some say it's the Veda, the rishis, all their things, I'm not a scholar. All I know is they were questioning people. All the statements were series of questions. They wondered aloud. So we continue to do that. That's our strength. We should not lose faith in that. That's very important. We don't necessarily agree with our fellow religionists. We are not. We don't behave as a commandable herd. No, I think that's our strength. But it's a losing game at the moment. But I am confident that India will prevail.
Right. So the other part of this question was going back to your comment where you said that writing books is critical because that's what is referred in literature, or people, use it as a reference point for building their own stories or their own research later on over the years. So do you see there is a reluctance, or even I would go a step further and say lack of talent or lack of interest in pursuing the more institutionalized way of knowledge dissemination, like writing books or writing articles, where we, trying to be very much social media reliant or dependent for some of these narratives?
Now, Harikaran Vadlamani, you know him. he has a summing up. He says, we are bloody lazy, he says. I think people are brimming with knowledge, our people, but they won't sit down and reduce it to a book which is credible, well referenced. There are very credible handles coming out now, and Vishwa Adluri and Jaydeep Bakshi, the nayscience people. That book is shaking the world. It's shaking the the weakness of the opponents of India, whether they're based on political enmity or ideological enmity or religious enmity. They think a time will come that India can be won and declared conquered. And India is a bonfire of certainties. We burn certainties. Nothing prevails. So we have still the time. You really cannot declare victory over India. Anytime you declare is too soon. So
Right.
I think the narrative has to be asserted by serious, well-referenced books that can be challenged and will face the challenge. And that takes scholarship. It's not in the realm of people like me. I'm a dilettante writer. I'm not a researcher. I was not trained as a researcher. I'm a marine engineer, and marine engineer is actually more like we used to call ourselves the highly paid coolies. We used to work with our hands. We don't sit on tables and command things. We are not part of the Chaebol army. We are hands-on people. So I am not equipped for that. But I do long. There's so many talented people. They should take to serious writing and give away. Don't go with the bombast. Take on a narrative that is annoying you and fight it.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. So you talked about Harikiran ji, and let's put in a couple of minutes about the Indic Academy's work, right? And you have actually, a lot of people don't know, but I know that you have supported that initiative yourself personally in a big way over the last few years. How do you see that shaping up as an initiative in general? I mean, do you see, quote unquote, have you become more Indic in the last 4, 5, 10 years that this initiative is going on? What's your view there?
I have a little bit of an insider view of Indic Academy, and I can give this as an evidence. The number of young talents that has been unearthed by the opportunities given by the Indic Academy platform, various platforms, is quite amazing. A couple of books. One example, the number of young people reading the Mahabharata. I had not read the Mahabharata ball by ball. I read only summaries. The number of young people, okay, they might have begun with Amar Chitra Katha and things like that. And the fascination and attraction to Mahabharata is a good sign. See, Mahabharata, to me, is not just a good yarn. It's a metaphor for what life is. It says the things that happen to people, the things that you think that are happening are new, has happened before, and how people coped with it. There's no such thing as a perfect person or a bad person. People have their flaws, people have their values, and they go. And you would think that there's a kind of an indeterminate narrative. Mahabharata hedges bets, its convictions both ways. You would think that it will not draw people. You would think that they would like a thriller. But it's amazing how many young people have been drawn to Mahabharata, for instance, and to writing about Ithihas. And I would credit largely to the initiative called Indic Academy and the number of grants that are being given. And you talked about my having chipped in somewhere. It's tiny bit compared with Harikiran has spent in terms of time and his own money. And many other people have also done, no doubt. But it's not the money, but the returns for the sum spent. See, now there's a new initiative called the Soft Power Magazine, which is part of it. I would urge everybody to go there. That's the in thing. And I saw it in a way that even the editor of Aparna Sridhar, she is doing a wonderful job there. And I doubt whether even Harikaran saw it the way I saw. I saw it as a Good News India portal born again, in a way. I don't think there are some sites, but this one, without making exaggerated claims, puts out the soft power, which is our strength. We have a depth in soft power and breadth in it that no other country can match. It's lying undiscovered. If somebody were to go mine for them and keep publishing it, that's good news. And this one is just yesterday, I came across a story written by a young lady for Soft Power magazine on an army doctor who retired, DRDO scientist who discovered 2 timely tools required for fighting COVID. A small portable oxygen generator and another one. So good things are happening. So I would say Indic Academy is a success, but the pity it is, I think it's amateur driven. It has its plus points and it has its minus points. But a lot of enthusiasm, energy is being put in. And see, the other thing that he did was just kept distributing books. Read this. Some of the books might be lying in their shelves, but you never know. Books have a way of jumping out of the shelf and fitting in your hands when the time comes. It has happened to me. It's almost spooky. There are books that have jumped out of the bookshelves in the bookshop and come to me, and that changed me. And books have a way of doing it. Books have life. Books have lives, and they do that. So he keeps sending those books, and many of them have been attracted by it. So in sum, I think it's a great effort. And it's a very low profile, doesn't push itself too much, but it has its big fans backing it.
Right. We, in fact, did a discussion on the forgotten heroes of Kurukshetra War early January with Sai Swarupa ji and two or three other writers who had written one chapter each for that book. And that was also in the collaboration with Yogi.
In fact, Sai Swarupa and Abhinav Agarwal, both are published authors. Sai Swarupa is much published, and Abhinav is on a second book. They write a vector called Indic Book Club. I think more people should go and join it. It's on Facebook.
Right, absolutely. Great. DVG, this has been a really fascinating conversation. Your positivity and your views are very inspiring, and I really hope that people learn from your experiences. And certainly, I would encourage the listeners and readers to read this book, which is published by Bloomsbury. It's available on all online platforms. It's called Good News India. Please buy it on Amazon, Flipkart, or in the stores once the lockdown ends. These are stories which are very inspiring, although they are 20 years old. But as we discussed, some of them are very relevant even today. And some of those people are getting recognized today for their work, which they did several years ago. And that should hopefully inspire people to also look for those stories around us today, so that we can talk about the same stories in media or in social media, and spread the right message of what's happening, what are the good things about the country in general. So, DV sir, thank you so much for your time. Really inspiring talking to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I feel honored by being interviewed by a respected and credible journalist like you. Thank you, Ashish. Enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of the Bharatvaarta podcast. If you want to see more content like this, then don't forget to subscribe to our channel. We started Bharatvaarta to facilitate long-form discussions on politics, policy, and culture. We don't necessarily endorse anything that was said in this episode. If you wish to offer us feedback, do reach out to us on social media. We are at Bharatvaarta on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. You could also get in touch with us on our website, www.bharatvaarta.in. The links are in the description below. Until next time, stay safe, take care, and Jai Hind.